My name is Dr. Manoj Jain, and with my colleague, Dr. Mark Musi, we're talking about mindfulness, meditation, and how it can help us achieve happiness. What mindfulness does is it transforms us, it makes us healthier, it improves our physical well being, but it also makes us more peaceful. In the presentation, we talked about what is peace and what are different types of peace that we can experience. And mindfulness helps us achieve this. So, Mark, peace is a very loaded word. There can be peace which is internal, there's peace which is external. You come from a field of religious studies, philosophy, and we've talked about how compassion and day-to-day activity as well as mindfulness can lead to peace. Talk through us your thinking on peace and how you visualize and picture this.
I like the way in your presentation you distinguish between an interpersonal peace or individual peace and peace within society and how these two things are related to one another. And I think that's very consistent with what we see throughout the philosophical and spiritual traditions. I also like very much the way you define peace as being much more than simply the absence of conflict. And we also see this in a lot of the traditions. So for instance, in Hebrew, the word for peace is shalom. But shalom means much more than just peace. In fact, I'm not sure that peace is always the best translation for that Hebrew word. Well-being may be a better word. And you can see readily how well-being and peace sort of match up with one another. It's very difficult to live a life of flourishing when one is not at peace, when one is suffering conflict. So peacefulness, as we use it in the philosophical language, has to be something more than simply the absence of something else. It really is a positive term, even though I think the way we ordinarily use the word in everyday language, we tend to suggest that it means that we're not fighting or we're not in conflict. It's much more than that.
Yeah, but when people want peace, they want peace now, as if instant gratification. And we've talked about how mindfulness can lead, and they think, well, mindfulness is like a pill or a medication that they can take and practice meditation, and boom, peace will happen. Does it happen that way?
Well, maybe. That may happen that way for certain people. I think peace now was a slogan that was often used in the 1960s. The difficulty is that we have been conditioned to be beings that almost automatically revert to conflict and violence. It's just part of the way we live our lives. It's just part of our culture. It's part of the way we're brought up. So when we want to live a life of peace, it's very difficult to do so on the spur of the moment. So let's take, for instance, an idea in which maybe I am confronted by someone who is angry at me, and I want to act in a peaceful way, but if I have been habituated to act and respond to anger or anger with violence, it's going to be very difficult for me to disrupt that habitual behavior.
So what we really need to be talking about is that meditation and mindfulness over the long term can help us become more peaceful. That we really are talking about a long-term practice and solution, and something that will ingrain in our minds. And can we do that as a society? Can we begin to look into ways that we can achieve that?
Well, I think that's an experiment that we haven't yet embarked upon as a society, but I'm certainly willing to risk it. I can tell you of a particular episode that comes to mind in which I think of how my preparation for interpersonal peace manifested certain fruits. So I've been practicing meditation for about 20 years when this particular event occurred. I was performing a wedding for former students of mine out in West Tennessee, and they wanted one of these nice garden weddings. It was a beautiful garden, and they wanted it at sundown, and it was overlooking this beautiful vista. And it was just a lovely occasion, and I began the ceremony. and began to read the words that I had written, and the bride and the groom were there, and suddenly I noticed a bee starts flying around as I am reading the ceremony. And I'm trying to disregard the bee for fear that it might disrupt everything that we had put together up to that point. And so I continued on, and as I was getting to the vows and about to recite the vows for the couple to recite back to me, the bee landed on my cheek.
Oh, my.
And you can imagine. My impulse, of course, was to freak out. But here I was in this beautiful setting amongst, several hundred people. And the last thing I wanted to do was to disrupt this wonderful wedding by doing some kind of ugly dance and trying to slap a bee away from me, or doing anything really to make this an unpleasant occasion. And this is where my meditation practice paid off. So in that moment, rather than react, to use the language you used in your presentation, I paused. I took a moment to reflect. And I was doing this so quickly that I was able to continue reading the script of my wedding ceremony while this was happening. And I allowed that bee simply to climb up my cheek, and he climbed around, and I think it was a he, I'm not quite certain about it, it could have been a she, but he or she climbed up between my eyeball and my glasses and just walked around for a little bit. And so I closed my eyes and was reading the ceremony, and just as I got to the end of the vows, the bee flew away.
Ah, that's beautiful.
And nobody knew what had happened, except the bride and groom, who were standing very close to me. And so I sort of consider that one of my great triumphs. Here it was, I practiced peacefulness because I did not react. I took a moment to respond, and to respond in a peaceful way.
So I'd like to share my experience as well. Not as dramatic as the bee, but certainly an experience which has helped me take time and do the things that we talked about, which is not to react, but to reflect and to respond. I received a nasty email, and it happens. And it was from a friend and a colleague, and I responded by doing reply all, something I advised that I should not have done. And that experience still haunts me today. And I responded in that email, even though they were being nasty or mean, or I perceived them being nasty or mean to me. I reverted with an equal amount of violence. In our conversation, we're talking about peace, but really the underpinning is this whole concept of nonviolence that is there. And in so many ways, we need to be practicing nonviolence, which we learn from the mindfulness and meditation practices that allows us to do that. And so that experience has taught me that be very careful about using reply all, but to take the time and to reflect and respond in a very appropriate and a non-violent manner, because that created a cycle of violence until a time came when I realized that it's no longer necessary to perpetuate violence, but to begin a non-violence act.
I've adopted a discipline where when I receive one of these angry emails, that I will not respond until 24 hours later. Yeah. Now, I may respond by writing out an email, but I will not hit the send button until I've had at least a day to think and see if this is really how I want to react to what has been said to me.
Well, Mark, those are wonderful thoughts and ideas, and a very good bee example as well, and practical also. So mindfulness and meditation can help us become more peaceful, more nonviolent in the short term as well as in the long term. Thank you for joining us for this conversation, and please join us in our next conversation where we talk about compassion, how mindfulness can make us more compassionate.